Chapter 6. Sum and possum. Chapter 6 covers the following: how to form the imperfect and future tense of sum, how to form the present, imperfect, and future of possum, and the use of the complementary infinitive. At the end of the lesson, we'll review the vocabulary which you should memorize in this chapter, and we'll show you how to prepare for Test 1. Sum and esse. In Chapter 4, you learned the present tense of the irregular verb sum esse. Remember it? Yes, you do. Don't lie to me, you remember it. All right, lie to me. Tell me you remember it. Well, then, fine. Here it is again. Let's recite it. Sum est, summus estis sunt. Coming back now? Don't answer that question. Since the present went so well, now let's look at the imperfect tense of sum. As with the present, the imperfect tense forms of esse are irregular. They are eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant. Notice that all these forms have as a characteristic vowel the letter A. This is the same A that shows up in the BA endings of other imperfect verbs. And as with other imperfect verb forms in Latin, the imperfect of the verb to be carries the sense of unfinished, repeated, or habitual action in the past, producing the following translations: I was, I used to be, I kept on being, you were, you used to be, you kept on being, he, she, or it was. Pretty obvious. Let's move on. Now let's look at the future tense of sum, which is also irregular. Its forms are ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritus, erunt. Notice that these forms share a characteristic letter I, which is also seen in the bi of other future tense forms. And notice that they also share the same irregularities. The characterizing I disappears in both bow and arrow, and it changes to you in the third person plural, bunt and erunt. Also, just like other future tense forms, the future of the verb to be carries the sense of action subsequent to the present. I will be, you will be, he will be crazy if we recite all of these forms. Moving on. All these tenses of sum need to be memorized. Not only are they important and show up as such in many Latin passages, but they are the basis of other verb forms to be learned later. Therefore, you must commit these to memory. Let's recite them together. Sum est, summus estis sunt, eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant, ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritus, erunt. Say this till you feel the cold hand of death upon your heart. Now let's look at another verb which is based upon the verb to be, possum. This verb, possum posse, is a compound of sum esse. Possum is really pot plus sum. Pot means able, sum means I am, therefore it literally means I am able. Posse is a combination of pot plus esse, meaning to be able. Here is the present tense of possum. Possum, potes, potest, possumus, potestis, possunt, and the infinitive posse. There's one minor irregularity here, which is really not an irregularity. When T runs into S in Latin, very often the T will change to an S and produce the geminate consonant cluster SS. So potsum will turn into possum, potsumus will turn into possumus, potsunt will turn into possunt, and pot esse will contract down to posse. Here's the translation of the present tense of possum. I am able, you are able, he, she, it is able, we are able, and since we're all able, let's just able on. There's an English irregularity that needs to be noted here. English has two ways to say be able. While we English speakers can say, I am able to do something, we can also say, I can do it. As in, I can, you can, he, she, it can, or whatever. Cannot, however, be used with the infinitive. In other words, in English, there are no two cans. Can involves another complication you should be aware of. After possum, Latin expects an infinitive, just like English able. I am able to do something. But English can does not expect an infinitive, just a simple verb form. I can do it, not I can to do it. Therefore, translating possum as can lead you to bad places, because from the presence of can in English, you might expect to have only a simple verb form, can do, when in Latin with possum, you'll have a complementary infinitive, are able to do. That's why be able is a better translation of possum, at least for now. Just like sum, possum changes tenses. Here is the imperfect tense of possum. Let's say these forms together. Poteram, poteras, poterat, poteramus, poteratus, poterant. As you can see, it's a simple compound of the prefix pot, which means able, attached onto the imperfect tense forms of the verb to be. This tense translates the same way all imperfect tenses translate in Latin. I was able, I could. You were able, you could, and so on. Possum also has a future tense, which is, as you can see, the expected combination of pot plus ero. Let's recite this one together also. Potero, poteris, poterit, poterimus, poteritis, poterunt. And it translates the way you would expect a future tense verb form to translate. I will be able, you will be able, and so on. Notice, just as there is no can to in English, there is no will can either, although I don't know why. I will can do this is not unattractive grammatically, and would save millions of syllables every day across the English-speaking world. Finally, let's look at an important grammatical construction, the complementary infinitive. In order to have a complete meaning, posse requires an infinitive, called a complementary infinitive, because it completes the meaning of the main verb. Please note this is not a complementary infinitive with an I. That means nice, and there's nothing nice about these infinitives. Complementary infinitives serve an important function. They complete the meaning of the main verb by answering the question, to be able to do what? Not all verbs can take complementary infinitives, only certain ones which require an infinitive to complete their sense. So far in this class, we have encountered only two verbs which can take complementary infinitives. Debeo, ought, as in ought to do something, and possum, the verb introduced in this chapter, to be able to do something. Now that we have this new grammatical category, you should be able to identify the use of the infinitive as complementary if it is completing the sense of debeo or possum. Later in the class, we'll learn other verbs that can take complementary infinitives. And speaking of learning other words, let's look at a new set of vocabulary. The first word, liber, libri, masculine, means book. It's a second declension masculine noun. We encountered this word before in Chapter 3, where it was used as an example of a base that ends in R and contracts. It may help you to remember our word library, which does not have an E between the B and the R. However, this derivative won't help you if you come from those parts of the country where the word is pronounced library. On an interesting etymological side note, the Latin word liber originally meant the inside layer of the bark of a tree, because early Romans apparently scratched letters on that surface. The word write, in fact, in many Indo-European languages means to scratch, as you would if you were going to write on the bark of a tree. Besides our verb write, this also includes the Latin verb scribo, and the Greek verb grapho. So I guess that makes tree bark an early form of scratch paper. The next word is tyrannus, tyranni, masculine, meaning tyrant or absolute ruler. It's a second declension masculine noun, and it's not originally a Latin word. The Romans borrowed it from the Greeks, but it's not a Greek word originally either. The Greeks probably borrowed it from a language in Asia Minor, perhaps Lydian, but the exact source is unknown. The next word is wittium, wittii, neuter, meaning fault or crime, a second declension neuter noun. Be careful not to confuse this word with a word we have already encountered, which looks much like it, witai, feminine, first declension, which means life. Look at the difference between the bases. The base that means life is vit. The base that means crime is viti. If it helps, remember the derivatives vitalize, meaning enliven, and vitiate, meaning corrupt. What would be the nominative plural of the word wittium? Remember it's neuter. That's right, wittia. And what would be the ablative plural? That's right, wittiis, with two i's right next to each other. Next comes an adjective, graikos, graika, graikum, meaning Greek. It's a first-second declension adjective. Often this word is used as a substantive, graikos, graiki, masculine, meaning a Greek man. If you pluralize it, it becomes the Greek people. The next word is another adjective, perpetuus, perpetua, perpetuum, meaning perpetual, uninterrupted, continuous. It's another first-second declension adjective. Here's another adjective, wester, westra, westrum, meaning your or yours, that is, belonging to you plural. It's a first-second declension adjective. As you can see from its second form, westra, this adjective contracts. The base is westra, V-E-S-T-R. Remember, as we noted when we studied this adjective's close relative noster, the endings on adjectives are merely directional. That is, they point the adjective toward the noun it agrees with. The point is, the ending on wester agrees with the noun it goes with in number, gender, and case. So, while wester always denotes a plural concept, it doesn't always have a plural ending. So, for example, if you have a noun-adjective cluster like westra poena, westra still means belonging to you, plural, but its ending is singular because poena is singular. The important lesson to remember here is that adjective endings are directional. They only point the adjective toward the noun it agrees with. The next word, que, a conjunction meaning and practically interchangeable with et, involves a simple concept, but one that may seem very odd to you. Just like ne, which we learned earlier introduces a question, que is an enclitic. Its purpose is to signal that the word and should come in front of the word which has que attached to its end. So, animi sapientiaque means courage and wisdom. And as far as we can tell, it's virtually interchangeable with animi et sapientia. The Romans just had two ways of saying and. And the quays could just keep coming. So the Romans could say, animi sapientiaque officiumque, meaning courage and wisdom and duty. Let's move on, que. The next word is sed. It means but. It's a conjunction. It's simple. It's just but. The next word, ubi, means when or where. It introduces a question or clause relating to the time and location of something. In other words, when the Romans said ubi, they wanted to know both where and when something was happening. Practical as it might be, this sort of four-dimensional thinking is foreign to English. When you encounter ubi, you'll have to decide whether when or where is the better translation in the particular context you're reading. The correlative of ubi, its pair word, is ibi. Ibi answers the question ubi is asking. Ubi? Ibi. Where? There. The next word, insidiae, insidiarum, feminine, means ambush, plot, treachery. It's a first declension noun that exists only in the plural. That means no Latin author ever says insidia, singular. They always say insidiae, plural. Its literal meaning hints at why this is true, and gives a glimpse of the paranoia that drove the Romans to greatness and world conquest. The word insidiae is a compound of the prefix in, meaning in, and the base sid, meaning sit. So it means sit-ins, but in a very different sense from our word. To the Romans, sit-ins meant the enemy, sitting in holes, waiting to jump out and grab you and take away your things. So, the only thing you can do is get to them first, and that means conquering the world. So it was really their fault we had to kill them. And finally, a verb, tolero, tolerare, meaning bear or endure. It's a first conjugation verb. And that's it. That's the end of the presentation for Chapter 6. For the next class meeting, please bring in a copy of the practice and review sentences for Chapter 6 on page 29 of Wheelock's text. When we've finished all the work for Chapter 6, you'll take Test 1. Go to the online materials for this chapter to see an example of that test with answers. That sample test is at the end of the web page. Here's the link. While leggi discipuli, studete.